I used to think a marriage fell apart in one big moment. It didn't. Not mine. Mine started with small things I could have explained away if I wanted to lie to myself. A note left unread. A chair left empty. A kid looking at me like he knew something I didn't. By the time I understood what was happening in my own house, I was already late. What I didn't know yet was how far behind I really was. My name is Ryan Carter. I was 44 when this happened, and I made my living selling industrial parts to manufacturing companies across the Midwest. It was good work. Steady work. The kind that paid the bills and kept me on the road 3 or 4 days a week. I met Megan Brooks at a charity dinner in Columbus. One of those business events where people wear nice clothes and pretend they're there for the cause. She was standing near the silent auction table in a dark red dress, with her 2 kids beside her. Emma was small then, quiet, holding on to her mother's hand. Tyler was older, already wearing that shut-down look some boys get when they've decided not to trust anybody. Megan and I started talking over some gift basket neither of us planned to bid on. 10 minutes later, it felt easy. She was funny without trying too hard. Tired, but still standing straight. She told me she worked in marketing for a regional healthcare company and was raising the kids mostly on her own. I liked that she didn't oversell herself. 6 months later, we were married. I moved into her ranch house outside Columbus. 3 bedrooms, small backyard, chain link fence in one section that leaned more every winter. Nothing fancy, but it felt like a place you could build a life in if people inside it meant what they said. For a while, I thought we were doing that. Emma took to me fast. Tyler never did. I handled most of the practical stuff. Yard work, repairs, groceries when I was in town. I filled Megan's tank every Sunday night if I was home. I'd leave a sticky note on the steering wheel before bed. Tank full. Emma has soccer at 9. It was a dumb little habit, but I kept doing it. One Monday, I came back from Indiana late and saw the same note still stuck to the wheel. Folded a little at one corner, but still there. That meant Megan had driven all day without touching it. I stood there with the driver's door open longer than I should have. Not because of the note itself. Because people stop seeing your small efforts before they stop seeing you. I didn't say anything. That was becoming a pattern. Tyler made it easier to notice things that were off, even when he didn't mean to. He was 16 by then and had gotten comfortable showing me exactly where I stood. If I reminded him about curfew, he'd look at me like I was some guy who'd wandered in from the street. One night, I came home, dropped my keys in the bowl by the door, and smelled dinner. I thought maybe Megan had gotten home early. Tyler was at the kitchen counter with a plate. I asked, "Your mom eat already?" He didn't look up, just pushed his plate a few inches and said, "Mom said, don't wait for her." There was no second plate in the sink. Nothing cooling on the stove. Nothing in the trash. Just one plate. One fork. One chair pulled out. I looked at the empty seat at the table. Then back at him. He kept eating. Emma noticed the other kind of change. The quiet kind. Megan started coming home later. Started taking calls upstairs, with the door mostly shut. Started putting her phone face down on the counter like that was normal. One evening, Emma climbed up next to me on the couch while I was half watching television and asked, "Why does Mom whisper when she goes upstairs?" I looked toward the staircase. I said, "Probably work." Emma leaned against my arm and stayed quiet. I stayed quiet too. But not because I believed what I'd just said. That was the part I remember most clearly now. Not some big fight. Not some dramatic scene. Just a little girl asking a plain question in a normal voice. And me realizing I didn't have a real answer. Back then. I still thought whatever was wrong could be fixed if I stayed steady long enough. I hadn't heard the call yet. I hadn't followed her anywhere. I hadn't seen how calm a person could look while stepping out of her own marriage. I was still in the part where a man tells himself to wait one more week and see if things make sense. They didn't. And the next thing I heard through a half-closed bedroom door made sure of that. That Friday I got home earlier than I was supposed to. A meeting in Fort Wayne got canceled after lunch. And instead of staying overnight like planned, I drove straight back to Columbus. I didn't call ahead. At the time, I told myself maybe I wanted to surprise Megan. Maybe catch dinner together before she disappeared into another late night at work. Really, I think I just wanted one normal evening. Her car was already in the driveway when I pulled in a little after 6:30. That caught my attention right away because lately she was never home that early. I came in through the garage like always. Set my bag down by the laundry room door. The house felt quiet in that way a house does when someone is there but not in the same room with you. Tyler was in the living room, controller in his hand. Some shooting game on the screen. Fast flashing light across his face. He looked at me once. Then back at the TV. "Thought you were in Indiana," he said. Meeting got cut short. I waited a second. Then asked, "Where's your mom?" He didn't pause the game. "Upstairs?" That was all he gave me. No extra words. No shrug. Just upstairs. Like he already knew I'd hear something if I went there. I took the stairs slow without thinking about it. Halfway up, I heard her voice. Bedroom door almost shut. Not work voice. Lower than usual. Soft. I stopped before I touched the handle. "I know," she said. "I miss that too." Then silence. A few seconds. Then, quieter. "I know. We just have to be careful." I stood there with my hand near the knob and didn't move. There are moments when your body understands something before your mind agrees to it. That was one of them. Nothing dramatic happened. No shaking. No shouting. No door flying open. Just my hand hanging there. And my eyes on the brass handle, like maybe if I kept looking at it long enough. The sentence I heard would change into something harmless. It didn't. Inside the room, she laughed once. Barely above a breath. A laugh I hadn't heard directed at me in a long time. I stepped back before the floor creaked. Went downstairs the same way I came up. Tyler was still on the couch. Still playing. He knew I'd gone up. I could tell by the way he didn't look at me when I came back through. I walked into the kitchen and opened the cabinet like I meant to get a glass. That was when I saw the mug. White, ceramic. Cheap Christmas mug with a chipped handle. I bought it 2 winters earlier because Emma liked the little painted snowflakes on the side. It sat beside the sink. Half an inch of coffee still inside. And lipstick on the rim. Dark red. Megan didn't wear dark red lipstick to work. She wore pale colors. Almost nothing most days. I picked the mug up and looked at it longer than I needed to. Not because lipstick proves anything. Because once your mind starts lining details up, it does it fast. The mug, the closed bedroom door, the voice upstairs, her being home early. Tyler finally lost a round and tossed the controller down. She said, "Don't go up there when she's on work calls." He said. I looked over at him. He kept his eyes on the screen while he said it. I put the mug back exactly where it had been. A minute later, Megan came downstairs. Phone in one hand. Face calm. Hair still neat. Like she had just finished answering email. "Oh," she said when she saw me. "You're home early. Meeting canceled." She nodded once. "Too like that explained everything." "Want dinner?" she asked. The question came too easy. "Sir." She opened the fridge and looked inside like she hadn't already checked what was there before I got home. I watched her shoulder, not her face. Long call. I asked. Client issue. No pause. No stumble. Just client issue. I nodded like I accepted it. That was the strange part. I didn't push. I think some part of me still wanted one more chance to be wrong. Emma came running in from the backyard a minute later. Shoes muddy. Hair loose. Asking if we still had ice cream. Megan smiled at her immediately. Easy. Natural. Tyler turned the volume back up, and the whole house settled into something that looked normal if you didn't know where to look. That night, I lay awake longer than usual. Megan slept facing the other side of the bed, phone charging on her nightstand. Face down, I watched the dark ceiling and replayed one sentence over and over. We just have to be careful. Not about work. Not about timing. Just careful. By morning, I still hadn't decided what I believed. But something in me had already stopped trusting the quiet in that house. And 3 days later, when I was supposed to leave for Milwaukee, I made a choice that changed everything. The next Monday, I was supposed to leave for Milwaukee for 3 days. Big client. Early meeting. Overnight bag packed by the door before breakfast. Megan knew the schedule because she always knew my schedule. She had asked the night before what time I planned to leave. And that alone stayed with me because lately she barely asked anything unless it affected her own timing. That morning, she poured coffee, checked her phone, and said, "You'll probably miss Emma's game Wednesday." I said, "Probably." Tyler was half awake at the table, scrolling on his phone. Emma was trying to peel the foil off a yogurt cup. Nothing looks strange if you only looked at the room. But once you hear something, you can't unhear. Ordinary things stop feeling ordinary. I carried my bag out like usual. Started the truck. Backed down the driveway. Turned left at the end of the street. Then I circled through the next block and parked 3 houses down where I could still see our driveway through bare branches. I called Milwaukee from the truck and pushed the meeting back 2 days. Said a family issue came up. The man on the other end didn't ask questions. Most people don't, if your voice sounds steady enough. Then I waited. An hour passed. Then another. At 10:13, Megan came out. No rush. No work bag. Just her purse and sunglasses. She locked the front door, got in her car, and pulled away. I gave her half a block before I started the engine. She didn't head downtown. Didn't go toward her office. She took the West Side Road past the shopping center and kept going until she turned into a hotel parking lot. I had passed 100 times and never paid attention to. Nothing fancy. Mid-range place off the highway. Brown brick. Small sign near the road. Cars parked in straight rows. I stayed back near the far edge by a row of empty spaces. She parked near the side entrance but didn't get out right away. She sat there, looking down at her phone. Then she adjusted her hair in the rearview mirror. That was the part that hit me first. Not panic. Not guilt. Just routine. Like she had done this enough times to know exactly how long to wait. A silver BMW pulled in 2 minutes later and stopped beside her. The man stepped out first. Tall. Dark coat. Expensive shoes. The kind that don't touch dirt much. He didn't hesitate. Walked straight to her door and opened it. Megan smiled before she even stood up. A real smile. Not polite. Not tired. The kind I hadn't seen in months. They met between the cars. He put one hand low on her back. She leaned into him like she already belonged there. Then he kissed her. Long enough that I looked away once and then looked back, because my mind still wanted proof, even while it was already sitting in front of me. When she turned slightly, she opened her trunk, reached in, pulled out a beige overnight bag. I knew that bag. I bought it for our anniversary the year before, because hers had broken on a work trip. I remember wrapping it badly in the garage because Emma kept trying to peek. Seeing it there almost landed harder than the kiss. Not because of what it meant, because I remembered paying for it. He took the bag from her hand like it belonged to both of them. Then they walked inside together. No hurry. No looking around. Like they had already decided the world around them didn't matter. I sat there gripping the wheel. Didn't get out. Didn't call her name. Didn't storm across the lot like people do in movies when they still think noise changes facts. 5 minutes later, I went inside. Only because I needed to know how far I could stand there and still breathe. The lobby smelled like coffee and floor cleaner. A fake plant near the front desk. No one looked at me. I stayed near a newspaper rack by the wall and watched them enter the elevator. Third floor button lit up. That was enough. I didn't follow. I knew what floor meant. I knew what an overnight bag meant. I knew what we have to be careful meant now. Back in my truck, I shut the door and sat still. Hands on the wheel. Engine off. A shopping cart rolled loose across part of the lot and stopped near a curb. That is the only thing outside the windshield I still remember clearly. Not because it mattered. Because when something breaks in front of you, your brain keeps one useless detail for no reason. After about 20 minutes, I started the truck and drove. Not home. Just away. I stopped at a bar off the highway before noon and sat at the far end. The bartender poured whiskey without asking much. I drank half and stared at the glass. For the first time since hearing her upstairs, I stopped trying to explain anything. By the time I left that bar, I already knew one thing. I wasn't going to ask for honesty from someone who had already built a routine around lying. I was going to leave. I just needed to know how cleanly. After the hotel, I didn't confront Megan. That surprised me too. I drove home that afternoon, parked in the driveway, and came in through the garage like every other day. By then, the whiskey was gone from my system. But the picture of her standing between those two cars stayed clear. The beige bag, his hand on her back, that was enough to keep my mouth shut. People think silence means confusion. Sometimes it just means you already know talking won't improve what you heard or saw. For the next 2 weeks, I did exactly what I had already been doing. I left for work, came home, sat at dinner, answered Emma when she asked about school, listened to Tyler move around the house like he owned more of it than I did. Megan acted normal enough that someone outside the house would have believed it. She asked about my roots, mentioned groceries, talked about a meeting next Thursday. The same person who had stood in a hotel lot on a Monday morning could still ask if we needed paper towels by Wednesday night. That part stayed with me more than I expected. One afternoon, I called a divorce attorney from my truck outside a parts warehouse near Dayton. Her name was Claire Bennett. Sharp voice. No wasted words. I told her the short version. Affair confirmed. Married 4 years. Joint accounts. She listened. Then said, "Check every account before you say anything. Savings first. Look for transfers you don't recognize." That night, Megan said she had another late work dinner. Emma had homework at the kitchen table. Tyler shut himself in his room. I opened the banking app on my laptop after Emma went upstairs. At first, nothing looked dramatic. Then I pulled the savings history month by month. Small transfers. 500. 800. 1200. Then bigger. Always spaced enough apart that I had missed them because I never had a reason to study every line. I wrote the number down after adding it twice. $47,000. Gone over 18 months. Sent to an outside account I didn't recognize. I checked it again because the first time my eyes refused to trust the total. Still 47. I took screenshots. Emailed them to a private address Megan didn't know I had. Then copied everything onto a thumb drive I kept in my truck. The next part happened by accident. Saturday morning. Megan, upstairs in the shower. Emma, at a birthday party with a neighbor. Tyler, gone somewhere with friends. Her laptop sat open on the kitchen counter. Email already loaded. I walked past it once, then stopped and came back. I remember looking toward the stairs first. Even though I could hear the shower running, the inbox was open. One name kept showing up. Ethan Cole. The early messages looked clean. Marketing language, scheduling, attached files. Then older ones changed tone. Then changed completely. I didn't read every word. I didn't need to. You only need one sentence. When the sentence says enough. One email from 3 months earlier read, Ryan notices less than people think. That line sat there on the screen cleaner than anything else around it. No anger in it. No guilt. Just certainty. I forwarded 12 emails fast. Sent them to myself. Deleted the sent confirmation. Closed the browser tab but left the laptop where it had been. The shower upstairs stopped. I moved to the coffee maker. When Megan came down, hair wet, towel around her shoulders. She smiled like nothing had happened. Coffee. Already making it. I said. She checked her phone before she even reached the counter. That same habit again. Like whatever mattered most always lived there first. A minute later, Tyler came in through the back door. Saw me near the counter. Saw the laptop. He opened the fridge. Took out juice. And said, without looking at me, "You should stop checking things you don't want answers to." Then he shut the fridge. No attitude in his voice this time. Just flat. Like somebody saying weather. I looked at him. He still didn't look back. That was when I understood he had known longer than I had. Maybe not everything. Enough to stop seeing me as someone who belonged there. I said nothing. Because by then the proof was already bigger than whatever either of them might admit. And once proof reaches that point, the next move matters more than the next sentence. That afternoon, I opened a new checking account in my own name. I didn't tell anyone. Once I opened that separate account, everything started feeling like it had a clock on it. Not panic. Just timing. I stopped thinking in weeks and started thinking in windows. Which afternoon, the house stayed empty long enough? Which drawer still held what I needed? Which things were mine without argument, and which things were better left where they already sat? Claire called me 2 days later while I was parked outside a machine plant near Toledo. I told her about the transfers, the emails, the hotel. She listened. Then said, "If you leave, document exactly what you take. Half is clean. Anything extra becomes noise later." That word stayed with me. Noise. I didn't want noise. I wanted one clean line between before and after. The chance came on a Saturday. Megan took Emma to a birthday party around noon. Tyler had gone out before lunch and didn't say where. The house got quiet in the way it only does when nobody is coming back for at least an hour. I went upstairs and pulled one duffel bag from the closet. Not a suitcase. Just one bag. Enough for clothes. Laptop. Charger. Documents. The thumb drive. And the folder where I had already placed copies of account records. I skipped half the things I could have taken, because once you start touching too much, you stop leaving cleanly. Bathroom drawer stayed full. Most shirts stayed on hangers. The watch my father gave me went in the side pocket. That was it. I sat on the edge of the bed once before standing again. Not because I was second-guessing it. Just because that room already looked unfamiliar. And I noticed it all at once. Her side table had 2 receipts folded under a candle. My side had nothing but a phone charger. Downstairs, I opened the banking app one last time. Transferred exactly half of checking into the new account. No more. I checked the number twice before pressing confirm. Then I logged out. The letter took less time than I expected. I used plain printer paper because there was no reason to make leaving look dramatic. Just wrote, Megan, I know about Ethan. I know about the transfers. Claire Bennett will contact you. Do not call me. Ryan. I folded it once. Kitchen table? Center. Then I took off my wedding ring. Set it on top of the paper. House key beside it. That part took longer than writing the letter. Not emotionally. Just physically. My hand stayed there a second before I let go. I looked around the kitchen once. The fruit bowl Emma kept forgetting to refill. Tyler's headphones near the counter. A school flyer under a magnet on the fridge. Nothing in that room looked dramatic enough for what it meant. That felt accurate somehow. I picked up my bag and walked out through the garage. No speech. No last look through the house. But when I backed out, the garage door was only halfway down before I shifted into drive. In the mirror, I could still see it open behind me for a second. Frozen at an angle. That image stayed with me longer than the street did. I drove south first, without deciding much beyond distance. Didn't answer my phone when Megan called the first time. Or the second. Or the sixth. By the time I crossed into Kentucky, the phone had stopped ringing long enough for texts to stack. I didn't read hers. At a rest stop just past the state line, I finally checked the screen. Most were from Megan. A few from numbers I knew from her side of the family. Then one from Emma. Where are you? Mom is crying. Tyler says you're not coming back. That was the only one that made me sit there longer than planned. Cars came and went around me. Someone slammed a truck door 2 spaces over. I read her message 3 times before typing back. I'm sorry. Kiddo, I love you very much. Be good for your mom. I stared at that too before sending it. Then I blocked Megan's number. Not Emma's. Just Megan's. By then it was late enough that the highway had gone darker than the dashboard. I kept driving. Didn't know exactly where I planned to stop. Only knew Ohio was getting smaller behind me. And for the first time in weeks, nobody in that house knew where I was. That mattered more than I expected. I ended up in Tennessee because I ran out of reasons to keep driving. By the time I crossed into the eastern part of the state, it was dark enough that the road signs showed up before the towns did. I stopped in Crossville because I remembered passing through once years earlier on a work trip. Nothing emotional about it. Just a name that felt far enough away. I paid cash for a week at a roadside motel. The room had a bed, 1 chair, and a small TV bolted to the dresser. I left my duffel bag zipped the first night and slept in the same clothes I drove in. For 3 days, I barely went anywhere except a gas station and a diner down the road. Claire called the second morning. I stepped outside to answer because the room smelled like stale carpet. She filed. Claire said, "That was fast." But not surprising. She wants the house. Half retirement. Support. And insurance. I leaned against the railing outside the room and watched a pickup truck idle near the ice machine. What matters? What matters is what we can prove. I told her to fight the parts that needed fighting and leave the rest clean. I didn't want hearings if paper could settle it. On the 4th day, I drove around without much direction and saw a handwritten rental sign nailed to a fence post. Small trailer, 5 acres. Monthly lease. The owner met me there that afternoon. Walter Hayes. Late 60s. Lean frame. Old work boots. Army cap faded enough to look permanent. He opened the trailer door and said, "It's solid. Deck needs a board replaced." Inside was simple. Narrow kitchen. 1 bedroom. A couch that looked older than both of us. Good enough. Walter stood in the doorway while I looked around. Then he said, Men usually show up here for one of two reasons: debt or betrayal. I looked at him. He shrugged once. Guessing works better than questions. I said, "Then, guess right." He nodded like that answered enough. I signed that day. Moved in the next morning. The first week there I kept things narrow. Coffee on the stove before sunrise. Chair on the deck. Phone calls with clients before noon. The deck looked out toward trees and one long ridge in the distance. Nothing dramatic. Just enough space that no one's voice arrived unless they were already close. That helped. Claire sent updates by email. Megan wanted more than made sense. The house had been hers before marriage, so I let that go immediately. Insurance for the kids, another year. I agreed. Spousal support. Retirement split beyond what law required. That part Claire pushed back on. One afternoon she wrote, "Settlement, moving. Stay patient." That became the routine too. Dub. Wait. Answer what needed answering. Ignore what didn't. Walter came by every few days without warning, usually carrying something useful. Firewood once, a wrench another time. One evening he brought 2 beers and sat on the edge of the deck without asking. After a while he said, "Best part of quiet is you start hearing what you ignored before." I asked, "You always talk like that." "Only when somebody looks like they need less advice than they're getting." That was probably the longest conversation we had the first month. The trail where I met Sophie was about 20 minutes outside town. I had started hiking because sitting still too long made old thoughts louder. That morning, I heard someone swearing before I saw her. Bike upside down beside the trail. Flat rear tire. She looked up when I got closer. "Please tell me you know how to deal with this." "I know enough." She stepped back and let me kneel by the wheel. Her name was Sophie Lane. Charlotte, originally. Tennessee for a year. No ring. No need to explain more than that. We talked while I worked the tire loose. Nothing deep. Just weather. Trails. And how cheap tools always fail first. When it held air again, she looked at the wheel. Then at me. "Coffee." I almost said no out of habit. Instead I said, "Depends if the coffee's decent." "It isn't," she said, "but the pie usually saves it." That was the first time since leaving Ohio that talking to someone felt normal instead of forced. No rush in it. No performance. Just 2 people sitting in a diner booth later that morning while rain tapped the front window. By then, the divorce still wasn't finished. But for the first time, my life no longer felt paused. It just felt unfinished. And unfinished was easier to live with than broken. By the time the divorce papers were final, Tennessee no longer felt borrowed. Claire sent the email early Tuesday morning. Signed. Filed. Done. That was all. No long legal summary. No extra lines. Just 3 words after months of paperwork. Bank records. Signatures. And silence. I read it at the kitchen table while coffee cooled beside my hand. Then closed the laptop and stepped outside. Walter was already under the deck, tightening one loose board like he had started his day before mine. "It's final," I said. He looked up once. Then back at the board. Then stopped standing like somebody still owes you an explanation. That was Walter's way of saying life had already moved. A week later, Tyler found me. I came out of the post office and saw him leaning near the gas station across the road. Taller than when I left. Leaner too. Hoodie hanging loose. Face older than 18 should already look. He crossed slow. Hands in his pockets. "Well," he said, stopping in front of me. "Guess you really meant it." I asked, "How'd you get here?" Mom had guesses. I had time. He looked around town like he expected less from it. Then he said, "She wants to talk." I stayed quiet. He tried a smirk, but it faded fast. "Mom said you always looked calm because you never understood what was happening." I looked at him and said, "No, I looked calm because I understood enough." That landed. He looked down at the curb after that. Then he said, quieter, "Emma still talks about you." Before leaving, he added one thing that explained more than he probably meant to. "I live with my real dad now. Mom couldn't keep the house." Then he walked back to an old sedan with one mismatched hubcap and drove off. 2 months later, Megan came herself. By then, I had moved on to the property Walter helped me buy. 15 acres. Small house. Half the porch still unfinished. I was setting railing when her car came up the drive. First thing I noticed was the car. Older gray sedan. Rear bumper taped at one corner. Second thing was the back seat. Boxes stacked unevenly. A child seat strapped behind the passenger side. Then the envelope on the front seat. County seal visible through the windshield. She stepped out carefully and shut the door. "Ryan." I set the drill down. "What are you doing here?" She stayed beside the car. For a second, I thought she might still try to soften it. She didn't. David left when I told him I was pregnant. I said nothing. I lost the job too. Internal review. HR said the relationship crossed reporting policy. Still nothing. Then she glanced at the envelope. "The house goes into foreclosure next month." The paper already said enough before she did. Not dramatic. Just official. The kind of envelope that tells you where your furniture goes next. She looked tired, in a way sleep doesn't fix. Then she said, "Emma still keeps your soccer picture by her bed." That was the card she came to play. I said, "That picture stayed because I showed up. You removed the reason I could." Her face changed. "So that's it. You rebuild and pretend none of us mattered." I didn't pretend anything. I said, "I left when pretending stopped making sense." She stepped once toward the porch. Stopped when Walter came around the side of the house carrying a level. He didn't speak. Just stood there. Megan looked at him. Then back at me. "You always make leaving sound clean." "No." I said, "Just necessary." For the first time since arriving, she looked like she had run out of arguments she believed herself. She got back in the car. No slammed door. No tears. Just gravel under tired tires. Walter waited until she disappeared down the drive. Then handed me the level. "Still crooked," he said, pointing at the railing. That was all. 2 years later, Emma came with Megan's mother. 10 years old by then. Tell her, still careful with the way she held things. She brought the old soccer trophy. The cheap one from that season. Because the team budget only covered medals and I bought 2 trophies myself. We sat on the porch steps. She talked about school. A new team. A teacher she liked. Before leaving, she asked if she could email sometimes. I said yes. A few months later, Tyler came back again. College age now. No smirk left. We sat outside a coffee shop in town. He looked tired before speaking. "My dad's nothing like what Mom said," he told me. I waited. Then he added, "You were the only adult in that house who kept showing up." That was the apology. Plain enough to believe. By then, Sophie was already living with me. Nothing dramatic there either. 2 mugs near the sink. Her boots by the back door. A second truck key beside mine. Some endings don't arrive loud. They just stop asking anything from you. If you had seen what I saw that Monday morning in the hotel parking lot, would you have left quietly too? Or stayed long enough to hear one more lie? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if stories like this stay with you, subscribe to Quiet Family Justice.